Can you believe this? What's even happening? Disney giving the guy a contract one day and then firing him just a few weeks later? Come on, Disney, what's happening in there? We want to know this conversation and many other things. So we did this special edition of Hollywood Breaks. Welcome and enjoy. Holy cow, Keith, I thought we were going to take this week off from Hollywood Breaks.
Never.
When we last Friday when we recorded, we were somewhat bantering about it. Actually, we were a week ahead when the quarterly reports were released. But Disney didn't hesitate. There was some swift moves over this weekend, wasn't there, with the replacing of Bob with Bob 2 with Bob 1.
Bob 2 with Bob 1.5? 2.0? 3.0?
Is it appropriate to say they're bobbing in and out of this thing? Is that how?
But Tim, wow. Tip your wagers on your way out, everybody.
Clearly, the quarterly report fiasco was the tipping point.
I think from what I've been able to surmise just from talking to people and reading, that was sort of the straw. The quarterly earnings, well, again, not horrible. I mean, they did have a pretty fantastic run with the parks, but the loss in streaming was, I think, not expected, and that contrasted with his cheery tone on the call, I think. And then followed up 2 to 3 days later with a letter to the entire company. Hey, we're going to have to make cuts and there might be layoffs. It was just very disjointed. And from what I can tell, there was also some, apparently Christine McCarthy, the CFO, was going to the board and saying, I don't really have faith in his leadership anymore. So that was sort of...
And a couple of board members, I want to say, that were defending him early on, where everyone kind of recognizes.
Susan Arnold, the chairwoman of the board, was apparently his biggest advocate. And when it came to, I mean, there had been apparently board members who were not happy with, a lot of what Chapek had done throughout his tenure. But she championed him and championed his contract renewal. And then I think it was just once he lost the confidence of a lot of like the senior leaders, including the CFO, I think that's when they felt they had to make a move. They had apparently identified some interim CEOs who are at Disney, but they didn't decline to identify who those were, but they didn't feel they were ready. So apparently Susan picked up the phone on Friday at 3 p.m., called Bob and Iger and said, would you be willing to come back? And the deal was done by Sunday night, and Sunday night was when the announcement went out. And I mean, it's stunning in how quick it happened, and also that Jamie got no statement, nothing. Just probably got a phone call, said, your lawyers, call our lawyers, and that was the end of it. And now he's gone. And then as of yesterday, Kareem Daniel, his number 2, who was running the Disney Media and Entertainment Distribution Unit, is out as well.
Well, that's one of my first questions when I heard the news, because we've been talking about Kareem since the minute he got his position. There was clearly some initiative in that move with Kareem to say, hey, let's focus on some business principles here. We're going to have distribution unknown, kind of handled by data or some kind of business team that's going to decide it, which we kind of said offhandedly that the reality is you don't know what you're making your content for. You basically make content, and then later on it would be determined where it went.
You'll make the determination of exactly. So
understanding of audience and blending audience is not there. Now let's just back up a little bit. So for those people who are catching up with this, Chapek was formerly the president of the parks, and when Iger left, he was announced as CEO and running the parks. Soon after Chapek took over, the pandemic hit. So there was some understanding that no one was prepared to run Disney at that moment, because no one had to ever deal with that situation before. Iger did stay on for a while, though, right? And he kind of helped through the transition. But I want to say Iger's voice was one of the first voices that said, maybe this is not the right person. So even though he was part of the transition, he was also an early one to recognize it wasn't the right person.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is that the succession of Disney post Iger has always been a complicated matter. Tom Staggs, who was at the time, I believe, the head of the parks, was initially anointed as a successor, and then Iger lost confidence in him, and so he was put out to pasture. Then Kevin Mayer, who was the head of the direct consumer division, was supposedly in the running, and then he didn't get it. I've read some reports that Chapek was actually identified in 2018 as the successor. He was told, you are the heir apparent.
Oh,
So there might have been some training involved there. And then there's always, February 2020, it's sort of the announcement was made. So a lot of people have inferred that Iger was hearing from his contacts in China about Corona, and he kind of wanted to step off before the shit hit the fan, if you will.
right.
But he was
And if
staying
you're
on as
going to exit
executive,
anyway, might as well just
right?
prepare and then,
But he was staying on as executive chairman, and I think, to supposedly to really be involved more in the creative side of the business, not necessarily in the operations of it. And I don't think that sat well with Chapek, and I don't think their relationship ever recovered. And then once Bob left, Iger, that is, and the sniping, I think, from behind the scenes continued, and that it's not helpful at any way when you leave a company and you continue to berate your chosen successor. So I don't think that helped matters either. But listen, let's be honest, Chapek made some very silly mistakes early on, and
so let's talk about a few of those. So let's recount some of what happened here too. So early on, some of the missteps he had was the one I remember this comes to my mind first is the contract dispute he had, or the Black Widow issue he had with Scarlett Johansson, and then the move to not recognize that the creative is what makes this industry happen, and not the creative, and not kind of think through that whole moment.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that was the first big one, because I was thinking about this earlier today. The industry is built on relationships. I mean, you could say every business is built on relationships, but the entertainment industry is a very select group of people, and it's a very small group of people, and it's all relationship based. And he kind of came in kind of like a bull in the china shop, and took on probably the most powerful agent, Brian Lord, at CAA, who was Scarlett's agent. And they tried to, they released a statement basically, calling her out, saying, oh, look at the 80 million, look at the super wealthy woman complaining about her $40 million salary.
Yeah, I remember that whole quote. That was crazy.
Which was not smart move. I think they were trying to play into the economics of it to try to get people to their side. It was silly and stupid. I mean, these disputes happen often, but they never spill out in the open like this. And that was his first big boo-boo, because that was sort of like okay, this guy doesn't get us. The creatives are saying this. And then he turns around and completely pulls P&L and control over budgets away from all these creatives that will run these divisions, and gives it to a guy in Kareem Daniel, who didn't have any creative experience. He's a Goldman Sachs guy who came up from Imagineering, and was always sort of Chapek's number two. So everyone's like, who is this guy? And we don't really know what this division is. And when they announced it, Chapek was like, well, you'll understand what it is, and you'll figure it out as it grows, but then it'll all make sense. And well into a year of it, everyone was still like, I don't understand what this is. Like, what does he do? How does this relate to the content? And so there's a lot of confusion, and I don't think there was as much buy-in as he led on when it first started. So I think that was also an issue.
Yeah, I think he was supposed to be like a Wall Street darling, like somebody that could understand the bigger picture, always kind of speak the data.
Right.
Hopefully, it feels a little bit like Chapek was trying to have like a board of leaders that could help him understand and navigate through the times, instead of being a certain visionary leader himself, or specific visionary leader himself.
What's interesting about it is, so Iger, his whole career, one of his biggest accomplishments was breaking down what was called during the Eisner era, the Strategic Planning Group, which was basically this huge org of like MBA guys and accountants who kind of were making a lot of decisions about what Disney was going to do in terms of what they were going to make and what companies they were going to go after. And Iger made it his first, big initiative to dismantle that, so that there could be more decision pushed down to sort of the division heads and the creatives, the ones who actually live, eat, sleep, and breathe the stories and the product. And this felt like a return to that, I think, for a lot of longtime Disney folk. And it was just felt like another extra layer of bureaucracy that was not necessary. And I think Iger kind of saw it that way. That was one of his biggest critiques. He didn't really like what Chapek was doing. And I think he had a lot of allies still at Disney, obviously. And I think he was letting his opinion be known, and not helpful again, but you know, it is what it is. But at the same time, it's not exactly, I mean, like I said at the beginning, none of this makes anybody look good, really,
Yeah.
to be honest.
No, I think that, listen, there obviously has to be a response to Wall Street. There was always been a play in Wall Street. Wall Street appreciated all the Disney Plus growth because that was part of what was happening
Right.
in this same era. And no one was doubting that that wasn't a positive thing. The way they were going after Netflix viewers, the way that actually the industry has been shaken up a little bit because there's a competitive platform. I would say that the Disney Plus platform has not evolved very much in the last year and a half. It really is simply a place like a library where Disney is holding their material. And if you want to access that material, you pay the subscription. And a lot of people who are subscribers, I'm going to guess, watch Frozen 100 times, and it's a great $10 a month for them to do it, right?
Yes, yes.
But so there was a moment where I guess it was a reaction that was going positive compared to other people in the industry that we've talked about plenty in our podcast that were responding poorly to the platforms, weren't possibly competing in the right place, even the misbranding of the HBO Max platform. Yep. There were a lot of also missteps. If you don't know what I'm talking about, listen to our episodes about Peacock. It's very clear who's failing in this game. Disney did not fail that process.
Well, yeah.
And that is under Chapek's era as well. Right. So there was plenty of reason to believe he was going to do it. But really, it was recently looking at the losses that made the big move, and Wall Street's not going to deal with a $1.5 billion loss, which is what was announced for the Q3 numbers.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about how it's all evolved, so when Disney Plus first launched, it was under Iger. Iger was the one who pushed the low price point because it was sort of, he wanted to get out early, he wanted to undercut Netflix, get as many subs as possible. Because at the time, if you all remember, all those 2 years ago, Wall Street was big on subscription numbers. That was what was driving. That's why everyone was crazy about Netflix, because they were growing. And it was like, look how many subscriptions they have. And then Disney Plus comes along with Hamilton, and then they explode onto the scene. So everyone was like, subscribers. And then all of a sudden, Netflix has their miss. And then Wall Street resets and says, wait a minute, they missed their number. How are they going to start making money? And then all of a sudden, everyone's like, how are we going to make money off this? And it's sort of like the coin sort of flipped. And now it's not necessarily just about subscribers anymore. It's about how you're going to make money off this. And the fact that Disney goes on that earnings call and showcases that once you factor in revenue and the loss, they lost almost $4 billion, it looks like, in 1 quarter on content. That is a terrible number. And yes, it was offset by record numbers at the
theme parks.
Resorts, the theme parks, but the margins are shrinking, and there's grumblings about the park themselves. So I think a lot of this is also driven by the fact that Iger, who obviously eats, sleeps, and breathes Disney and had in his tenure, I think he was worried that the brand itself was suffering. And because of sort of, we've talked about the dipping quality of Marvel movies. We've talked about the dipping quality of material on Disney Plus that's not Marvel or Star Wars. The complaints that are coming about the park, people are starting to complain about the cost and how they feel like they're getting nickel and dime, and it doesn't feel like it's a trip for middle-class families anymore. It feels like it's becoming a trip for only those who are sort of in the upper crust of society, which is not Walt Disney's vision. So I think there's
and that's, I'd say the park is also one of his steps. Interesting, because he was the president of parks. He actually had a couple of missteps with the parks. One, right, the latest is the price, but even before that, taking on the state of Florida and trying to figure out how to navigate that. Clearly, again, in a hard spot, because there was some messaging within the state of Florida that Disney was quiet about. The basic, Chapek basically said, we're not part of the politics, let's not deal with it. But under pressure from the employees, under pressure from people that are fans of Disney, the social pressure was too much. And then when he came out, he basically started fighting the state instead of playing it in a way that, recognizing that they are a major brand, a major contributor, but recognizing their role and trying to do it diplomatically. It wasn't handled. That wasn't handled well. And I think that's probably the very first shot for Iger to say, hey, if I was there, I would have done something different. And that was the beginning of people ask questions. Should we do something different than have Chapek, who's kind of tone deaf to these issues, should we keep him at the helm? Should we be doing something different? And that sounds to me like probably when the very first discussions were taking place,
Yeah,
of like, how do we do something different?
yeah, I think it was that. And then that sort of calmed down and it felt like he was getting his footing. And then all of a sudden there was the abrupt firing of Peter Rice, like out of nowhere. Like it's announced that Peter Rice was fired. And supposedly the meeting to tell him, Peter, that he was fired between him and he and Chapek was 7 minutes or something like that. And he was never really given a reason. I mean, everyone knows the reason, because he was a threat and Chapek wanted him gone. But again, it was just another needless sort of controversy that he just walked into. And again, sort of months after re-upping him. Like, if you don't want the guy there, then don't give him an extend his contract. He extended his contract and then he turned around and fired him. So there just wasn't a lot of, it just felt like he was making a lot of knee-jerk decisions, not really thinking things through. I mean, whether or not that's true or not, that's sort of the perception. And I think the board was concerned, and obviously he knew that the look of the sudden firing was bad, because the board released a statement like the same time the announcement of the firing was released, basically saying we have confidence in the decisions that Chapek is making. So clearly he knew that this was not going to go over well. But at the same time, it was like throwing himself into an endless, another controversy when things were just really starting to settle down after the whole Florida controversy, the Scarlet controversy, the whole new Kareem Daniel division, all these things that sort of just happened. And it just seemed like he was making decisions that just didn't seem like they were well thought out. And I think a lot of senior,
or to be honest, like maybe it's just
get concerned.
All political. Like, it's not like, if I were to replay that in my mind, I would think something like, the Florida misstep was something that started chaos, that Iger was probably asking different questions of, can he diplomatically run one of the most powerful corporations on the planet? Was Wall Street recognizing his confidence? I guarantee you there was investors talking to anybody that would listen. So Iger, who was working for Kushner's organization, big in capital, big on the Wall Street firm, was listening to other people's advisors and reporting back or asking questions about it. So if Chapek got that news and he's playing politics, he's probably asking, how do I survive? Where do I go? And if Rice was a competitor of his early on, he's recognized it and trying to remove it so he can last longer. Okay, you can almost understand the chess game being played inside.
I can understand the chess game. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I can understand that again, but it was just sort of like again, then don't re-up his contract, because this wasn't something that came out of the blue, unless there's something that we don't know about, that Peter was sort of working behind the scenes to undermine Chapek and it got back to Chapek. Entirely possible. But again, it just created another controversy that just really, just as things were settling, like it finally seemed like things were coming down. The parks were starting to fill up again. People were coming back to the movies. It felt like things were sort of moving like he was finally getting his feet. And then all of a sudden, boom, there's another thing that, people are going to start questioning. So
the article I read about this is interesting, because the quote that they used was the Iger understands the change of putting the decision making back in the hands of the creative team. So the release of Kareem Daniel, the release of Chapek, understands that creative is necessary. And if you look back for the last couple of years, even though there was billions spent on content, the reality is I can't remember any of it. I have no idea what Disney has done. Right. I don't know if there's an advancement of the creative field. I don't know if they created any new brands. Pixar hasn't been a player at all in the last couple of years. I don't even later Iger years, I don't think there was a play there either. There seemed to be building up these universes instead of focusing back on the content. But maybe this response of like, wait, we're going to go into recession. People want entertainment. Disney is a known brand. We can entertain them. Why get into all these other messes? Let's just run the business we're supposed to do. Let's get back to the basics.
Yeah.
Let's focus on the success of ESPN. Let's not mess that thing up or push things around like there was conversations. Let's put things back to an orderly fashion while in a recession and see if we can't survive.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that's definitely a step in the right direction, but that's not going to change the metrics that they're looking at right now. That's not going to change the fact that linear cable is falling. Cord cutting is increasing.
Sure.
They don't know what to do with ESPN. They've got investors who are pressuring them to sell ESPN. The park issue is still going to have to be dealt with because they've got somewhat, a lot of unhappy consumers with the park. So there's a lot of things that are still that are happening that just giving power back to the creatives isn't necessarily going to solve. I think it's going to make things a little better as far as how people feel on the Burbank lot, which is obviously important. But at the same time, he still has all these major issues that he's going to have to deal with. Like another big question that's sort of hanging out there. Well, what about the cost cutting and layoffs that Chapek announced? Is that no longer a reality? That Iger hasn't said one way or
No,
another.
I'm sure that's a reality. It's so much easier to replace him
Yes.
after he does the hatchet, because
Right.
you don't be your fault. And I'd say this, like, really truly, we know what this move is. It's a confidence move. So the issues are there. The issues need to be addressed. The question
Right.
is who's Wall Street going to trust to get us through it?
Well, that's
so they
true.
don't keep
Yeah.
on withdrawing and dropping the share
Yeah.
price. So if you think Iger is the right person to get through it, then you're going to kind of diamond hand this a little bit longer, hold on to your assets and see what's possible, than
Yeah.
selling at a loss when there's a possible gain in the future.
Well,
So-
and when the announcement was made, the stock did jump like I think 6% or so, which is not like whoa, and a major improvement, but it signals that most of the investors have more trust in Iger leading the ship than Chapek. And I think that's ultimately what the board came around to. They're like, we are a listing ship right now, and that call was sort of just a disaster, and clearly investors weren't buying his cheery tone, followed by the letter that said, oh wait, no, we are actually going to have to make cuts and layoffs. And I think that was just sort of the end, and they just lost complete faith in him. And I think the board realized that once your investors lose faith, you kind of have to take action. And Iger was really the only one that they could turn to in this at this point, because there really wasn't anyone else. So I mean, the next thing, and he has been tasked by the board as part of his deal to find a successor. Like, that is his job. His contract's up, I think, in December of 2024. So he has to find a successor. He needs to
I'm
get on
available. So
ASAP.
he should.
Well, we're both
fully
available. So if he wants to call us, we can split the titles, right?
We can rev think this thing. We can Hollywood break this thing up, no problem. So let's talk about the future. What do they need to do to clear things up, right? We know that they're making big moves. They're speculating what the issues are. They're speculating that Wall Street's going to appreciate that Iger is the person filling in for it. We also know Iger as a visionary, a person that bleeds Mickey in a way. Like, he knows it through and through. And he was truly the strategist that built on post Eisner what needed to be understood of what the growth is. Right. Eisner was basically pillaging all the assets. Iger got into back to building new assets, and Marvel being one of the best successes, and Disney and the Lucas films, another great success for them. So let's speculate now, because we're going to look back on this episode just a few months from now and wondering how good we were doing this. But what do we need to do next? If you're Disney, if you're stepping in here, what are the big moves that you need to start with?
Well, I think that obviously it's to take a look at your spend on direct to consumer.
Obviously.
Take a look at that, see where that's going, see if, the price increase, I believe, goes through in 2 weeks. December 8th, I think, is when it was going through. I don't foresee him forestalling that. I think he's going to let that ride and see what kind of the numbers look out there. They got to figure out what to do with ESPN. They got to figure out what to do with Hulu. Should they buy out Comcast? They probably should at this point, because that option, I think, should be exercised, I think, in 2023. But they have it till 2024 to exercise it. I think they're going to have to look at that as a possibility, and just sort of start firing the engines again on the creative side and get back to figuring out how to monetize the content in the best possible way. It's going to be interesting because he has made comments that he doesn't feel like linear cable and theatrical is ever going to bounce back to the pre-pandemic phase. So I think they have to look at, well, what's next then? What is the next option? How do we continue this? I think another thing is they got to get another Star Wars film out.
Yes.
I mean, that's
gained $4 billion in a weekend.
Yes.
This was Star Wars film, right? Well, and the other thing we didn't touch on, but related to Star Wars somewhat, is the Fox acquisition. It hasn't really been sorted out. Hasn't been a great gain for them. Avatar coming up. I'm almost curious if they knew what the early numbers are in Avatar as part of this decision, and not waiting for a downfall or explosion of crap there, or if Iger knew better and thought, well, I better become CEO before this possible upward swing, and I could take credit for it. Who knows how that's going to play itself out? But the Fox acquisition really is not equal to Marvel or
No.
Lucas at this point. And there's a great library there that's not being touched and leveraged.
Well, they basically turned that in. They basically turned Fox into 20th Century into a pipeline for Hulu. Like they took Killar's idea, Jason Killar, former CEO of Warner Media, who was making movies specifically for HBO Max, and they took that strategy and applied it to Hulu. So, okay, you're just going to make movies, 20th Century film team, you're just going to make movies for Hulu. I don't think that's necessarily the smartest game. You're right. They have really great brands. There's something to be said for trying to develop some of that and seeing where that can potentially take them. And I think you're right. I think they probably were the board holistically was looking at a lot of things. They were probably looking at, Black Panther 2 Wakanda Forever, which is tracking below the first Black Panther, which is not spectacular. It doesn't look like it's going to match the first Black Panther. And then you've got Avatar, which, if that doesn't work, you got 3 sequels that are supposed to come out. So this movie's got to work. So I think there's a lot of things that we're kind of all factoring in, but I think Iger is the type, because he has creative experience. He has worked in a creative environment. He was a creative himself. He ran ABC. So he knows the ins and outs, and he knows the people to trust. So I think that's going to play into it as well. And I think
so. You're saying the big play, one of the first things that you recognize is the big play of television, cleaning up ESPN, recognizing the use that Hulu has in the world, ABC, and understanding the platform there, getting ahead of the cord cutters, letting people know that there's a need there. So we know the television format. We know that there's assets sitting out there that are not leveraged and leveraged properly. Pixar hasn't grown, created any good content. We need to get back to the creatives running the field so we can get that happening again. Fox needs to be leveraged and built forward. We probably need to release a Star Wars so that we can make up for some lost assets, but we need to find another platform so Disney Plus has reason to keep the subs going. We didn't really discuss the issue that Disney had when cricket was dropped in India, the whole idea of other areas that were not well managed or not retained that kept assets flowing outside of the US marketplace.
Right.
But we know that they're on the platform, there's things that Iger needs to do. So we have television needs to clean up, we have assets he needs to clean up, we have a platform he needs to clean up. Parks might be the easiest thing to clean up because it's basically just get bodies to show up and eat churros. Let's not pillage them.
That's part of it.
To do it, right?
But the big thing was the sort of the pricing strategy is to try to manage the crowds, because there are so many people that want to go to Disney, and the pricing strategy was a way to try to limit that. But I think other things have slipped as a regard, like the experience of Disney has sort of lost a little bit of its magic. It doesn't feel like the special place it once was. And there you've got a lot of loyalists who are sort of balking at the prices they've got to pay. So there's a lot of work he has got to do there. So we'll see how that all shakes out. But yeah, you pretty much nailed pretty much everything that I think.
And then the last thing is, I'm going to guess the whole idea of Disney becoming a metaverse world that's going to be dropped, right? When the strategy team that formulated that as an idea is walking out the door, that's going to be probably put on pause for a while.
Yeah, probably. You got to focus on the core product first before you start breaking out into.
And no Disney ship has sunk in the last couple of years. If we can just keep the ships floating on the seas with not any major issues.
And they're launching a brand new one, I think next year. It's supposed to be like their best cruise ship yet.
But no coronavirus outbreaks, no, port issues.
No more global pandemics, and hopefully it'll be smooth sailing.
Yeah, that'd be it. This is almost again like an exciting time to be understanding and covering this stuff.
Yeah,
I'm a little disappointed that they stepped backwards to Iger. Totally get the move because they have to play confidence, but there is opportunities for things to step forward. And let's go back to some of the very first episodes we talked about, the things that we know are true that haven't been leveraged. Also, there's something that happened with the Paramount decree that we thought Disney was a big part of, and that's where the theaters, the distributors, and the content makers could do something together. I'm going to say the team that put that in place is coming back, so we might see some big moves there.
Well, yeah, I mean, Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that Iger has said he doesn't think it's going to go back to the way theatrical is going to go back the way it was pre-pandemic, then he recognized that something has to be done.
Yeah, and he'll play his
So,
cards there that he can.
yeah.
And we know that Disney will always survive. We're just looking for it to be the force that it has the opportunity to be. And again, early thought here, and probably last thought here, is there's a moment to say, let's not have the old guard run the studios anymore. So this might be a chance for the young guard, the new content makers, and new programmers that are out there to start thinking differently, making content differently. And who knows, we might be taking on TikTok from Disney in the near future, because that's the opportunity that's there.
Yeah, I just hope Iger, I think one of the first thing is they need to put together a sort of a list of successors and get on that ASAP, because that person's going to need to follow around Iger for the next as much as possible. And hopefully it'll be somebody who's on the younger side and not, the same old person who's been working in Hollywood for 30 years, because we really need some fresh thinking to really propel the industry forward.
So Bob, when you're listening, you can get a hold of me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm available at either platform. Happy to go to work for you. I'll bring Keith along with me. Keith will not be the cream Daniel of my enterprise. Keith will become the Bob Iger of my thought process here, and building up the future, the strategies that we need to be there. And together we'll break this Hollywood for you, man.
That's right.
Call out, get a hold of us, because we know you're watching, Bob. Kareem didn't watch.
He's a
and
big
Bob
fan.
too. He never answers our phone calls, but we know you're the one. You're the one listening to us. So tune in here.
Oh, I love it.
All right. Well, I'm glad we got through this special edition, because we just couldn't sit on this for a week and a half waiting for it to happen.
Could not sit on a week for a week and a half. Absolutely not.
Have a great holiday with you and your family. Safe travels to you as you do it. And Lydia, thanks for dragging the team into this thing at last minute. You guys are amazing.
Go, Lydia.
All that you have going on for us. We appreciate you. We couldn't do it without you. And to you listening, please send us comment, make the things happen, subscribe. Let's talk about this. This is a great opportunity for us to understand what's happening in content. Clearly some waves are going to happen from this, probably some slowdown. So the creative's going to win now. The good stories are going to be handpicked, not just making content for everyone in the crap zone that has been there for years. So this is a great opportunity for you creatives to find that, understand what makes a difference. And if you don't know where to get the information from right there. This guy sitting next to me. Vision Craft Brew is a place they can strategize and making this stuff happen. But we got to make a difference now. This is a great moment. Let's make that difference.
Wow. Amen to that.
All right, Mr. Man. Have a great trip.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Thank you. Later.